My 9-year-old granddaughter knocked on my door in the middle of the night. "Grandpa, please come to my house. Dad and Mom are gone, and the place is full of police." When I arrived, a policeman handcuffed me. "We know your connection to the criminals. We found everything." That's when the sniffer dog started barking. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. The pounding on my door came at 3:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake, staring at the digital clock beside my bed, wondering why sleep seemed to escape me more often these days. At 66, my body had developed its own schedule, and apparently, rest wasn't part of it. But this wasn't my usual insomnia keeping me alert. The frantic knocking sent ice through my veins before I even recognized the voice. "Grandpa Patrick, please open up." Bella, my 9-year-old granddaughter, standing on my doorstep in the middle of the night. I threw on my robe and rushed to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I opened it, she practically collapsed into my arms, her small body shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Bella, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" I knelt down to her level, trying to keep my voice calm despite the panic rising in my chest. She was wearing her pink pajamas with unicorns, the ones Aria had bought her last Christmas. Her blonde hair was messy, as if she'd run all the way here, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "You have to come to our house right now," she gasped between sobs. "There are police cars everywhere, and Mommy and Daddy are gone. They just disappeared, Grandpa. I was so scared, I hid under my bed until they left, then I ran here." My blood turned cold. "Police cars? Bella, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened." She wiped her nose on her pajama sleeve, a gesture that would normally make me smile. "I woke up because there were loud voices downstairs. When I looked out my window, there were like 5 police cars with flashing lights. Men in uniforms were carrying boxes out of our house. Big, heavy boxes." I felt my chest tighten. "Where are your parents?" "I don't know." Her voice broke into a fresh wave of tears. "I heard Daddy shouting something, but then everything got quiet. When I went downstairs later, they were gone. Just gone, Grandpa. The house was all messed up, like someone had been looking through everything." I pulled her close, feeling her tiny heart beating frantically against my chest. In the 35 years since Gregory was born, I'd never seen anything like this. My son wasn't perfect, but he wasn't a criminal. He worked as an accountant for a small firm downtown, lived a quiet life with Aria and Bella in their modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Street. "We need to go there right now," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Get in my car. We'll figure this out together." The drive to Gregory's house took 12 minutes, but it felt like hours. Bella sat in the passenger seat, unusually quiet now, clutching a small stuffed elephant she'd grabbed from my couch. I'd given it to her 2 years ago for her 7th birthday, and she'd left it at my place during one of her weekend visits. As we turned onto Maple Street, my worst fears materialized before my eyes. 3 police cars were still parked outside Gregory's house, their red and blue lights painting the quiet neighborhood in an ominous glow. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the front yard, and I could see neighbors peeking through their curtains. "Stay in the car," I told Bella, but she was already climbing out. "Sir, you can't be here." A young police officer approached us, his hand resting casually on his belt. "This is an active crime scene." "This is my son's house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Patrick Morrison. My granddaughter came to get me. She said Gregory and Aria disappeared." The officer's expression changed immediately, and not in a good way. He spoke into his radio using codes I didn't understand, then turned back to me with a look that made my stomach drop. "Mr. Morrison, I need you to put your hands behind your back." "What? Why?" The world seemed to tilt sideways. "I just got here. My granddaughter needed help." "Patrick Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering and tax evasion. You have the right to remain silent." The words became a distant buzz in my ears as the cold metal handcuffs clicked around my wrists. Bella screamed behind me, but another officer was already guiding her toward a social services vehicle that had appeared seemingly from nowhere. "Grandpa, don't let them take me." Her voice cut through my shock like a knife. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," I called out, though nothing felt okay. Nothing made sense. I'll fix this, I promise. But as they led me toward the police car, I caught sight of something that made my blood freeze. Through Gregory's front window, I could see men in uniforms carrying out boxes and files from what looked like his home office. One of them held up a manila folder, showing it to another officer who nodded grimly. "Wait," I said to the officer holding my arm. "What evidence are you talking about? I don't understand what's happening here." He paused, looking at me with something that might have been pity. "We found documents with your signature, Mr. Morrison. Bank accounts opened in your name. Financial records showing large cash deposits that don't match any legitimate income source. Your son and daughter-in-law have been cooperative in providing information about your activities." The word cooperative hit me like a physical blow. Gregory and Arya had given them information about me? What information? I'd never done anything illegal in my life. I'd worked 43 years as a maintenance supervisor at the local school district, saved every penny I could, and had barely $58,000 in my retirement account. "This is a mistake," I said, but the officer was already opening the police car door. "I've never opened any bank accounts beyond my checking and savings at First National. You can call them. They'll tell you." But nobody was listening anymore. As they guided my head down to get into the car, I caught one last glimpse of Bella being led away by a social worker. Her small face was pressed against the car window, tears streaming down her cheeks. In that moment, sitting in the back of a police car with my hands cuffed behind me, I realized that my quiet, predictable life had just exploded into a nightmare I didn't understand. Someone had set me up, and they'd done it so well that even my own family had apparently turned against me. The question that haunted me during the silent ride to the police station was simple but terrifying. If Gregory and Arya were really gone, who had fed the police information about my supposed crimes? And why did I have the sinking feeling that this was just the beginning of something much worse? The interrogation room smelled like stale coffee and fear. I'd been sitting in that metal chair for 4 hours, my wrists still aching from the handcuffs, while Detective Sarah Martinez went through a stack of documents that supposedly proved my guilt. "Mr. Morrison," she said, sliding a bank statement across the scratched table toward me, "can you explain why you opened 3 separate accounts at Harbor Trust Bank between January and March of this year?" I stared at the papers, feeling like I was looking at evidence of someone else's life. The letterhead was real, the bank logos looked authentic, but the signature at the bottom of each application made my hands shake. It was mine, or at least it looked exactly like mine. "I've never been to Harbor Trust Bank in my life," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know where it is." Detective Martinez raised an eyebrow. "It's on 5th Street, Mr. Morrison, 2 blocks from where you worked for 43 years. Are you telling me you never noticed it?" My mouth went dry. She was right, of course. I must have driven past it thousands of times during my daily commute to the school district, but I'd never set foot inside. "I bank at First National," I insisted. "I've had the same checking and savings accounts there for 28 years. Call them. They'll confirm it." We did call them. She pulled out another document. "According to their records, you closed both accounts on February 15th of this year and transferred the funds to Harbor Trust." I felt the room spinning around me. "That's impossible. I was there just last week to deposit my pension check." Detective Martinez studied my face for a long moment, then made a note in her file. "Mr. Morrison, we also found these." She spread out 3 more bank statements, each showing deposits that made my head reel. $127,000 in February, $89,000 in March, $215,000 in April. "Where did this money come from?" she asked. "I don't know." The words came out louder than I intended, and I forced myself to lower my voice. I've never seen amounts like that in my life. My biggest deposit was $1,200 when I got my tax refund 3 years ago. She leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Your son Gregory provided us with some interesting information about your recent behavior, Mr. Morrison. He said you'd been acting secretively lately, taking unexplained trips, receiving phone calls that you wouldn't discuss with the family." My heart clenched. Gregory had said that about me? "What trips? I haven't been anywhere, except the grocery store and doctor appointments in months." He also mentioned that you'd been pressuring him to invest in certain business opportunities, high-risk ventures that seemed suspicious to him. I stared at her, feeling like I'd fallen into some alternate reality where everything I knew about my life was wrong. Detective, I've never given Gregory investment advice in my life. I don't know anything about business. I fixed broken radiators and replaced burned-out light bulbs for 4 decades. That's not exactly training for high finance. She made another note, and I could tell she wasn't buying my denials. Where is your son now, Mr. Morrison? I don't know. That's why I came to the house. Bella said they'd disappeared. Bella is your granddaughter? Yes. She's 9 years old, and she was terrified when she came to my door this morning. She said police had taken boxes from the house and her parents were gone. Detective Martinez nodded. We did remove several boxes of evidence from the residence. Financial documents, computer equipment, personal papers, all related to our investigation into your money laundering operation. It's not my operation. I slammed my hand on the table, then immediately regretted the outburst. I'm sorry, but this is insane. I don't have a money laundering operation. I don't have any operation except trying to figure out how to afford my blood pressure medication on a fixed income. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not sympathy exactly, but maybe a crack in her certainty. Your daughter-in-law Aria, she said carefully. When did you last speak with her? The question caught me off guard. Last Sunday, Gregory brought Bella over for dinner and Aria came with them. How did she seem? I thought back to that evening, trying to remember details that had seemed unimportant at the time. Normal, I guess. Maybe a little quiet. She spent most of the dinner on her phone, but that's not unusual for her. What I didn't tell Detective Martinez was that Aria had always made me uncomfortable. Not in any way I could put my finger on, but there was something about the way she watched people, as if she was constantly calculating angles and advantages. Gregory had met her 3 years ago at some online dating service, and they'd married within 8 months. It had seemed rushed to me, but my son was 33 and lonely after his divorce from Bella's mother. Did she ask you any unusual questions during that dinner? I frowned, trying to remember. She asked about my retirement accounts, how much money I had saved, where I kept important documents, that sort of thing. I thought she was just making conversation. Detective Martinez leaned forward. What did you tell her? The truth, that I have my pension, a small savings account, and some papers in a safety deposit box at the bank. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications. You don't think We're exploring all possibilities, Mr. Morrison. She gathered up the bank statements. Here's what I can tell you. Your son Gregory is currently in protective custody. He came to us voluntarily yesterday afternoon, claiming he'd discovered evidence of your illegal activities and feared for his family's safety. The words hit me like a physical blow. Gregory turned me in? He provided us with documents and testimony that led to the search warrant for your property and his residence. I felt tears burning my eyes, something I hadn't experienced since my wife died 6 years ago. My own son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle and helped with homework for 12 years, had betrayed me to the police. What about Aria? Is she in protective custody too? Detective Martinez hesitated, and in that hesitation, I sensed something important. Mrs. Morrison appears to have left town before we could speak with her. We believe she may have been frightened by the investigation and fled. Or, I said quietly, the pieces starting to fall into place in my mind. She disappeared because she knows something you don't. The detective's expression hardened again. Mr. Morrison, are you suggesting that your daughter-in-law is somehow responsible for framing you? I met her gaze steadily. Detective, 3 months ago, I was a retired maintenance worker who spent his days reading library books and watching game shows. Now you're telling me I'm some kind of criminal mastermind who laundered hundreds of thousands of dollars. Either I've developed multiple personalities, or someone who had access to my personal information has been very busy. She stared at me for a long moment, then closed the file. We'll be in touch, Mr. Morrison. Don't leave town. As I walked out of the police station into the harsh afternoon sunlight, my mind raced with questions that didn't have answers. How had someone forged my signature so perfectly? Who had access to my personal information? And most importantly, where was Aria? And what did she know about the web of lies that was destroying my life? I had 48 hours before I had to report back to the police station. 48 hours to figure out how someone had stolen my identity and used it to frame me for crimes I didn't understand. The problem was, I didn't even know where to begin. I spent the first night after my release from police custody sitting in my kitchen, staring at a yellow legal pad covered with my desperate attempts to make sense of what had happened. The clock above my refrigerator ticked past 2 in the morning, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Detective Martinez's face and those bank statements with my forged signature. The call came at 7:15 the next morning. "Mr. Morrison?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional. "This is Janet Walsh from Child Protective Services. I'm calling about Bella Morrison." My heart lurched. "Is she okay? Where is she?" "She's safe, but she's been asking for you repeatedly. Given the unusual circumstances of her case and the fact that she has no other immediate family available, we'd like to arrange a supervised visit." "What do you mean, no other family available?" There was a pause. "Her father is still in protective custody, and her mother remains unavailable. Bella has been quite distressed, and she keeps insisting that you didn't do anything wrong. She says she has something important to tell us about her mother. Something important about Aria. When can I see her?" "This afternoon at 2 o'clock. The visit will be supervised, and I need to warn you that anything discussed may be relevant to the ongoing investigation." I arrived at the Child Services office 15 minutes early, my hands sweating despite the October chill. The building was a grim brick structure that looked more like a prison than a place designed to help children. Janet Walsh turned out to be a kind-faced woman in her 50s who led me to a small room with child-sized furniture and toys scattered on a low table. When Bella walked in, she ran straight into my arms, nearly knocking me over. She was wearing different clothes, jeans and a yellow t-shirt that were clearly donations, and her hair had been braided by someone who didn't know she preferred it loose. "Grandpa, I knew you'd come," she whispered against my chest. "I told them you didn't do anything bad. I told them Mommy was lying." Janet Walsh, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, leaned forward. "Bella, remember what we discussed about using your words carefully?" But Bella pulled back from me, her 9-year-old face more serious than any child should be. "Grandpa, I have to tell you about the basement, about what Mommy was doing down there." A chill ran through me. Gregory's house had a finished basement that he'd converted into a family room and storage area. Bella loved playing down there because it was cooler in the summer and had her gaming console. "What was your mother doing in the basement, sweetheart?" Bella glanced at Janet Walsh, then back at me. "She told Daddy and me that we weren't allowed down there anymore. She said she was doing important work stuff and we would mess it up. But sometimes at night, when I couldn't sleep, I could hear her typing on a computer, like really fast typing. And sometimes she was on the phone talking to people in a mean voice." Janet Walsh made a note in her file. "Bella, what kind of mean voice?" "Like when she used to yell at the grocery store people when they didn't give her what she wanted, but meaner. She would say things like, 'He's too stupid to figure it out,' and 'The old man believes everything.'" The old man. I felt sick to my stomach, but I tried to keep my voice calm. "Did she mention my name, Bella?" "Lots of times. She called you Grandpa Patrick sometimes, but other times she called you bad names." Bella's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "She said you were easy to trick because you trusted people too much." Janet Walsh looked up from her notepad. "Bella, did you ever see what your mother was working on in the basement?" "One time I did. I was supposed to be sleeping, but I heard her computer making that beeping sound like when you print stuff. I snuck downstairs to get a drink of water, and the basement door was open just a little bit. Mommy was standing at Daddy's desk with lots of papers spread out." "What kind of papers?" Bella scrunched up her face, trying to remember. "Some of them had Grandpa's name on them. I recognized it because I can read good now. And there were some papers that looked like the ones from Daddy's work, but those number charts he's always making." My hands started trembling. "Bella, did you tell your father about this?" "I tried to, but Mommy heard me asking Daddy about the basement, and she got really angry. She told Daddy that I was making up stories because I was jealous that he loved her more than he loved me. Bella's voice got smaller. Daddy believed her. He said I shouldn't make up lies about Mommy because she worked hard to take care of our family. I felt a surge of anger toward my son, followed immediately by pity. Gregory had always been trusting, sometimes to a fault. When his first wife left him for another man, it had shattered his confidence in his own judgment. Arya had probably seemed like a godsend, attractive, attentive, eager to be part of his life. What else do you remember about that night, sweetheart? I heard Mommy talking on the phone to someone. She was saying things like, "The accounts are ready," and "he signed everything without even reading it." And then she laughed, but not like a happy laugh, like the laugh she made when she told Mrs. Peterson next door that her garden was ugly. Janet Walsh had stopped taking notes and was staring at Bella with a mixture of concern and fascination. "Bella, this is very important. Do you remember anything else your mother said during that phone call?" Bella nodded vigorously. She said, "Patrick Morrison is going to take the fall for all of it, and by the time anyone figures out what really happened, I'll be long gone." I remember it because it sounded like something from one of those police shows Daddy watches. The room fell silent except for the ticking of a wall clock shaped like a cartoon cat. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My own daughter-in-law had not only stolen my identity and framed me for crimes, but she'd planned it so carefully that she'd anticipated every step of the investigation. "Bella," I said gently, "when did you hear your mother say these things?" "The night before the police came. She was on the phone really late, and I woke up because I heard her moving around upstairs. She was putting stuff in suitcases, but really quietly, like she didn't want Daddy to hear." Janet Walsh leaned forward. "Did you see her leave the house?" "No, but in the morning her car was gone. Daddy said she went to visit her sister in Virginia, but Mommy doesn't have a sister in Virginia. I know because I asked her once about all our relatives, and she said her only family was a brother in California who she didn't talk to anymore." I closed my eyes, trying to process everything Bella had told me. Arya had systematically planned my destruction, using her access to my personal information and Gregory's trust to create an elaborate frame job. She'd opened bank accounts in my name, forged documents, and then disappeared just before the police investigation began, leaving Gregory to unknowingly provide evidence against me. "Grandpa," Bella said suddenly, tugging on my sleeve, "there's something else, something I found." She reached into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out a small piece of paper folded many times until it was no bigger than a postage stamp. "I found this in the basement the day before everything happened. It was on the floor under Daddy's desk, like it fell out of one of Mommy's papers." I unfolded the paper carefully. It was a receipt from FedEx, dated 2 days ago. The sender was listed as A. Morrison. Arya had used Gregory's last name. The destination was a P.O. box in Miami, Florida. Janet Walsh took the receipt and studied it carefully. "Bella, you've been very brave to remember all these details and save this paper. This information could be very important." As the supervised visit ended and I had to leave Bella behind again, she grabbed my hand one more time. "Grandpa, I know you didn't do the bad things they said you did. Mommy did them. And I think she did them because she wanted all of Daddy's money and yours too. But she had to get rid of you first." Walking back to my car, I realized that my 9-year-old granddaughter had figured out what it took the police and a team of investigators to miss. Arya hadn't just stolen my identity, she'd orchestrated an elaborate con game that would have left her with access to both Gregory's assets and whatever money she'd made the police think I had hidden away. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She hadn't counted on a curious little girl who noticed details and asked questions. Now I had a thread to pull, and maybe, just maybe, I could unravel the whole web of lies before it destroyed what was left of my family. The question was, would anyone believe the word of a disgraced grandfather and a 9-year-old child against evidence that looked so convincing? The Miami P.O. Box receipt changed everything, but convincing Detective Martinez to take it seriously took 3 days and the intervention of a lawyer I couldn't afford. Harold Brennan was a criminal defense attorney who took my case pro bono after his secretary, whose grandson attended the elementary school where I'd worked for 4 decades, convinced him I was being railroaded. The receipt is interesting, Detective Martinez admitted during our meeting at the police station. But it doesn't prove your innocence, Mr. Morrison. It just suggests that your daughter-in-law may have been involved in your operation. I wanted to grab her shoulders and shake some sense into her, but Harold placed a restraining hand on my arm. At 72, he'd seen enough cases to know when to push and when to wait. "Detective," he said calmly, "my client has maintained his innocence from the beginning. This receipt, combined with the child's testimony about suspicious activity in the basement, suggests we should take another look at the evidence. We've already searched the residence thoroughly." "It's with respect," Harold continued. "You searched it as a crime scene related to Mr. Morrison's alleged activities. Perhaps it's time to search it as a potential crime scene where Mr. Morrison was the victim." It took another 2 days of legal maneuvering, but finally Detective Martinez agreed to another search of Gregory's house. This time, they brought a different kind of expertise. I arrived at Maple Street on a cold Thursday morning to find 2 police cars and a K-9 unit van parked outside Gregory's house. The yellow crime scene tape was back up, and curious neighbors had gathered on their porches to watch the proceedings. Detective Martinez approached me as I got out of Harold's car. "Mr. Morrison, we're going to conduct a more thorough search of the property, including areas we may have overlooked before. The dog is trained to detect electronics and unusual chemical signatures that might indicate document forgery." The dog was a German shepherd named Rex, handled by Officer David Kim, a soft-spoken man in his 30s who explained their process as we watched from the sidewalk. Rex is trained to find hidden electronics, unusual paper chemicals from printing operations, and even trace amounts of certain inks used in document forgery, Officer Kim said. "If there's something in that house that doesn't belong, he'll find it." The search began in the main living areas, where Rex sniffed methodically around furniture and walls, occasionally sitting to indicate something of interest to his handler. They found Gregory's laptop computer, which had already been seized during the first search, and a small home printer in the office upstairs. Then they moved to the basement. I watched through the kitchen window as Officer Kim led Rex down the wooden stairs to the finished basement, where Bella had seen Aria working late at night. The basement was carpeted and furnished like a family room, with a large sectional sofa, a television, and Gregory's old desk pushed against one wall. Rex began his methodical search, moving from the entertainment center to the storage closets, then along the walls. For 15 minutes, nothing seemed unusual. The dog sniffed, investigated, and moved on without indicating any discoveries. Then something changed. Rex stopped suddenly near the far corner of the basement, where a tall bookshelf stood against the wall. His ears perked up, and he began pawing at the bottom shelf, whining softly. Officer Kim called upstairs, "Detective Martinez, you need to see this." We all crowded down into the basement as Rex continued to indicate something behind the bookshelf. Officer Kim examined the wall carefully, running his hands along the paneling. "This doesn't look right," he said. "The paneling here is newer than the rest of the wall." Detective Martinez called for tools, and within minutes, 2 officers were carefully removing the wood paneling to reveal what lay behind it. What they found made everyone in that basement fall silent. Behind the fake wall was a small room, no bigger than a closet, but equipped with sophisticated electronics that looked completely out of place in a suburban home. There were 3 laptop computers, a high-end laser printer, a scanner, and stacks of documents organized in neat piles on a makeshift desk. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Crouched in the corner of the hidden room, wearing the same clothes she'd worn to our last family dinner, was Aria. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was stringy and unwashed, her makeup was smeared, and she clutched a backpack to her chest like a shield. When the light from our flashlights hit her face, she blinked like a nocturnal animal, caught in the open. "Aria Morrison, you're under arrest," Detective Martinez said, her voice carefully controlled despite the obvious shock of finding a missing person hiding in her own basement. "You don't understand," Aria said, her voice hoarse from what must have been days without much speaking. "I was hiding from him, from Patrick. He threatened me. He said if I didn't help him with his money laundering scheme, he'd hurt Gregory and Bella." Even as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she was still trying to manipulate the narrative. But her credibility had been shattered by the discovery of her elaborate hiding place. Officer Kim and his team immediately began photographing and cataloging the contents of the hidden room. What they found there told a story that made my blood run cold. There were dozens of practice sheets where Aria had copied my signature over and over until she could forge it perfectly. Bank applications with my forged signature, ready to be submitted. A notebook containing my social security number, my mother's maiden name, my date of birth, and dozens of other pieces of personal information that could only have come from someone with intimate access to my life. But the most damning evidence was a detailed timeline written in Aria's handwriting outlining her entire plan. Phase 1. Gather personal information about Patrick Morrison through casual family conversations and access to Gregory's files. Phase 2. Open bank accounts using forged signatures and identity documents. Phase 3. Create false transaction records showing large cash deposits to establish pattern of suspicious activity. Phase 4. Plant evidence in Patrick's residence and Gregory's home office to support money laundering allegations. Phase 5. Disappear before investigation begins, allowing Gregory to unknowingly provide testimony against Patrick. Phase 6. Return after Patrick is convicted to comfort Gregory and gradually gain control of family assets. Reading that timeline felt like watching someone dissect my life with surgical precision. Aria hadn't just stolen my identity. She'd systematically destroyed my relationship with my son and planned to profit from my imprisonment. The computers contained extensive records of the forged documents, Officer Kim reported. Bank applications, transaction records, even practice runs of fake business contracts, everything needed to frame someone for financial crimes. Detective Martinez turned to me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something approaching an apology in her eyes. "Mr. Morrison, it appears we owe you a significant apology. The evidence in this room strongly suggests that you were the victim of an elaborate identity theft and framing scheme." As they led Aria up from the basement, she made one last desperate attempt to maintain her lies. "Patrick forced me to do all of this," she called out. "He said he'd kill my family if I didn't help him." I was terrified. But nobody was listening anymore. The evidence spoke louder than her words ever could. Harold Brennan put a hand on my shoulder. "Patrick, I think it's safe to say the charges against you will be dropped within 24 hours. The real question now is, what charges Mrs. Morrison will be facing?" As I watched them load Aria into a police car, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness that I hadn't expected. Relief because my innocence had finally been proven. Sadness because my son had lost his wife and Bella had lost her mother, even if that mother had turned out to be a criminal who would have destroyed all of us to satisfy her greed. But there was something else I felt as I stood on that lawn, watching the woman who had almost ruined my life being driven away in handcuffs. Hope. For the first time in weeks, I had hoped that my family could be rebuilt, that Gregory could forgive himself for doubting me, and that Bella could come home where she belonged. The nightmare was finally over, but I was beginning to understand that the healing would take much longer than the destruction had. The interrogation room where I'd been questioned just a week earlier now held a very different occupant. Through the one-way mirror, I watched Aria sit across from Detective Martinez, no longer the composed woman who had charmed my son into marriage. Her hand shook as she reached for the paper cup of water on the table, and dark circles under her eyes made her look years older than her 31 years. Harold Brennan had arranged for me to observe the questioning, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what Aria had to say. Part of me just wanted to go home, collect Bella, and try to rebuild what was left of our family. But I needed to understand how deep her deception had gone. "Mrs. Morrison," Detective Martinez began, her voice professional but not unkind, "we've found extensive evidence of identity theft, document forgery, and fraud in your basement workspace. We have your written plan detailing how you intended to frame your father-in-law. Do you want to tell us your side of the story?" Arya stared at her hands for a long moment. When she finally looked up, the mask she'd worn for 3 years had completely fallen away. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started as just curiosity." "Curiosity about what?" "About Patrick's finances. When Gregory and I got married, I thought his family had money. Patrick had worked for 43 years, owned his house outright, seemed comfortable. I figured there had to be substantial savings, maybe investments." Detective Martinez made a note. "But you discovered that wasn't the case?" Arya let out a bitter laugh. "Patrick Morrison is exactly what he appears to be. A working-class man who saved every penny he could and ended up with a modest retirement. No hidden wealth, no secret accounts. Just $58,000 in savings and a pension that barely covers his monthly expenses." I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness hearing her describe my financial situation with such disdain. "So what changed?" Detective Martinez pressed. "If you knew he didn't have significant money, why go through with the elaborate fraud scheme?" Arya's composure cracked completely then, and tears began streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration and anger. "Because I needed money, and I was tired of pretending to be happy with Gregory's pathetic middle-class life. Do you know what it's like to be married to an accountant who gets excited about a 5% raise? Who thinks dinner at Applebee's is a special occasion? Who wants to save for 10 years before buying a decent car?" The venom in her voice made my stomach turn. This was how she really felt about my son, about the man who had loved her and trusted her completely. "I had debts," she continued, "credit cards, personal loans. I'd been living beyond my means for years before I met Gregory, and marrying him was supposed to solve that problem. But his salary barely covered our basic expenses, and Patrick wasn't the generous grandfather I'd hoped he would be." Detective Martinez leaned forward. "So you decided to create money by framing him for money laundering?" "I decided to get creative about solving my financial problems," Arya said, a flash of her old manipulative self showing through. "The money laundering thing was just the cover story. The real plan was to access the accounts I created in Patrick's name." "Accounts you funded with what money?" Arya hesitated, then sighed. "I was running several online dating scams, fake profiles on various websites, targeting lonely older men. I'd build relationships with them over months, then create emergency situations that required money transfers." I felt sick. While she'd been playing the loving wife and stepmother, she'd been systematically defrauding vulnerable people. "How much money did you steal through these scams?" "About $430,000 over 2 years, she admitted. "I was planning to transfer it all to offshore accounts and disappear, but I needed someone to take the blame for the suspicious banking activity. Patrick was the perfect patsy. Old, trusting, and just naive enough to sign documents without reading them carefully." Detective Martinez looked disgusted. "Documents you brought to him under the pretense of helping Gregory with his business taxes. Patrick would sign anything if he thought it was helping his son. I brought him fake investment papers, insurance forms, tax documents. He signed them all without question because he trusted me." The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. I remembered those occasions clearly. Arya coming over with official-looking papers explaining that Gregory needed his father's signature for various business purposes. I'd been proud that my son's career was advancing, that he needed his father's help with complex financial matters. "What about Gregory?" Detective Martinez asked. "What was his role in all of this?" For the first time, Arya's expression softened slightly. "Gregory didn't know anything. He's exactly what he seems to be, honest, hardworking, gullible. I manipulated him just as much as I manipulated Patrick. You convinced him that his father was involved in criminal activities. I planted documents in our home office, then discovered them with Gregory. I showed him bank statements, transaction records, forged correspondence. I made it look like Patrick had been using our address for some of his illegal business activities." My heart ached for my son. He must have been devastated to believe his father was capable of criminal behavior. I told Gregory that I was terrified of Patrick, that I thought he might hurt us if we didn't cooperate. Gregory is protective by nature. Once he believed I was in danger, he would have done anything to keep me safe, including turning his own father into the police. I convinced him it was the only way to protect our family. I said if we cooperated with the authorities, Patrick would get help for his problems instead of just being arrested. Her voice turned cold again. Gregory actually believed that turning his father in was an act of compassion. Detective Martinez was quiet for a moment, processing the scope of Aria's manipulation. What was your endgame? After Patrick was convicted, what was supposed to happen? I would comfort Gregory through his father's disgrace, help him cope with the betrayal. Gradually, I'd convince him that we needed to start fresh somewhere else, maybe move to Florida, where I'd already established my new identity. She looked directly at the mirror, where she must have known I was watching. I would have been the devoted wife who stood by her husband during the worst time of his life. He would have been grateful to me forever. The calculation in her voice made me realize how completely I'd misjudged her character. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. It was a carefully planned destruction of everything my family held dear. Why hide in the basement? Detective Martinez asked. Why not just leave town as planned? Because I realized I'd made a mistake with Bella, Aria said, her composure cracking again. That kid notices everything, remembers everything. When the investigation started moving faster than I expected, I panicked. I thought if I disappeared too quickly, it would look suspicious. So I hid in the basement workspace I'd built, planning to wait until after Patrick was arrested, then return from my supposed trip to Virginia. But Bella had already told people about your suspicious behavior. That little brat ruined everything, Aria snarled, her facade of victimhood completely gone now. If she'd just minded her own business instead of sneaking around and asking questions, this would have worked perfectly. Hearing her speak about my granddaughter with such hatred was the final straw. I stood up, ready to storm into that room, but Harold Brennan grabbed my arm. Let her finish burying herself, he said quietly. She's confessing to multiple felonies. Every word is being recorded. Detective Martinez continued her questioning. Mrs. Morrison, are you aware of the charges you're facing? Identity theft, wire fraud, money laundering, filing false police reports, and conspiracy charges that could result in 20 to 30 years in federal prison? The color drained from Aria's face. 20 to 30 years? But I was just trying to solve my money problems. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone permanently. You destroyed a man's reputation, traumatized a child, and nearly sent an innocent person to prison for crimes you committed. The victims of your dating scams lost their life savings. How is that not permanent harm? Aria slumped in her chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd done. I want to make a deal, she said desperately. I'll tell you everything, all the victims I defrauded, all the fake accounts, everything. Just please don't let them give me 30 years. Detective Martinez closed her notebook. That's not my decision to make, Mrs. Morrison. That's between you, your lawyer, and the federal prosecutor. As they led Aria back to her cell, she looked once more at the mirror where she knew I was standing. Her lips moved silently and I could read the words, I'm sorry. But her apology felt as hollow as everything else about her. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, she was sorry she'd been caught. Walking out of the police station, I realized that while my legal nightmare was over, the emotional damage Aria had inflicted on my family would take much longer to heal. Gregory would have to live with the knowledge that he'd betrayed his own father based on lies. Bella would have to process the fact that the woman she'd called Mommy was a criminal who had tried to destroy her grandfather. And I would have to find a way to forgive my son for believing I was capable of the crimes Aria had pinned on me, even though I understood he'd been as much a victim of her manipulation as I had been. The truth was finally out, but rebuilding trust would be the hardest challenge yet. 3 months after Aria's arrest, I stood in the kitchen of my small apartment, teaching my son Gregory how to make his grandmother's famous chocolate chip cookies. Bella sat at the kitchen table, carefully measuring brown sugar into a bowl, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration, the way it always did when she was focused on a task. No, Dad, you're mixing too fast. Gregory said, reaching over to slow my hand on the electric mixer. Remember? Grandma always said the secret was to mix just until the ingredients were combined, not until they were smooth. It was a small moment, but it meant everything to me. For the first time in months, Gregory was comfortable enough to correct me, to treat me like his father instead of like a victim he needed to handle carefully. The charges against me had been dropped completely 6 weeks earlier. Aria had pled guilty to 14 federal charges and been sentenced to 18 years in prison. The money she'd stolen from her dating scam victims had been recovered and returned, and the forged documents had been destroyed. Legally, it was as if her crimes against me had never happened. Emotionally, however, the healing process had been much more complicated. Gregory had been released from protective custody the day after Aria's arrest, but it took him 3 weeks to work up the courage to call me. When he finally did, he couldn't get through a single sentence without breaking down crying. "Dad, I'm so sorry," he'd sobbed over the phone. "I believed her. I actually believed you were capable of those things. What kind of son does that make me?" I'd wanted to comfort him immediately, to tell him it wasn't his fault, that Aria had been a master manipulator who had fooled everyone. But Harold Brennan had advised me to take things slowly, to let Gregory process his guilt and understand the full extent of how he'd been used. "Son," I'd said carefully, "you were protecting your family based on evidence that seemed real. I'm not angry with you for that. I'm angry with the woman who made you believe your father was a criminal." But forgiveness, I'd learned, was more complicated than anger. Gregory needed to forgive himself before he could accept my forgiveness, and that process couldn't be rushed. The breakthrough came when Bella was allowed to come home. Child Protective Services had kept her in foster care for 2 months, while Gregory attended mandatory counseling sessions and completed parenting classes designed to help him recognize signs of manipulation and abuse. When she was finally returned to his custody, the 3 of us had our first dinner together since the nightmare began. "Daddy," Bella had said over a plate of spaghetti, "I'm not mad at you for believing Mommy's lies. She was really good at lying. She fooled me too sometimes." Gregory had stared at his 9-year-old daughter, amazed by her ability to articulate what he'd been struggling to understand. "But I should have listened to you when you tried to tell me about the basement," he'd said. "Maybe," Bella agreed with the brutal honesty that only children possess. "But you listen to me now. And Grandpa Patrick isn't mad at you either. He told me so." That conversation had opened the door to real healing instead of just polite forgiveness. Now, as we baked cookies together in my small kitchen, I could see that my family was slowly becoming whole again. Gregory had lost weight during his ordeal, and there were new lines around his eyes, but he was no longer the broken man who had emerged from protective custody. The counseling had helped him understand how Aria had systematically isolated him from me and manipulated his perceptions over the course of their marriage. "She was so subtle about it," he'd explained to me during one of our weekly dinners. "She never directly said you were a bad person. She just planted seeds of doubt. Comments about how you seemed secretive lately, or how you asked unusual questions about our finances. She made me think I was the one noticing problems." Bella had been remarkable throughout the entire recovery process. At 9 years old, she had a clearer understanding of what had happened than many adults would have. The foster family she'd stayed with had been kind, but she'd told me that she'd known all along she'd be coming back to us. "I knew you and Daddy would figure out that Mommy was the bad guy," she'd said matter-of-factly. "She wasn't very good at being a mom anyway, but she never knew my favorite foods or remembered which stuffed animal I liked to sleep with." Her resilience amazed me, but I knew she'd need therapy to process the trauma of losing the woman she'd called Mommy, even if that woman had turned out to be a criminal. We'd started family counseling sessions, all 3 of us together, working through our feelings about betrayal, trust, and forgiveness. "Grandpa," Bella said now, interrupting my thoughts as she held up a measuring cup full of chocolate chips, "can we put extra chips in these cookies? Daddy said you used to let him do that when he was little." I glanced at Gregory, who smiled and shrugged. "I might have mentioned that you were a pushover when it came to extra chocolate chips." "I was not a pushover," I protested. But I was already reaching for more chocolate chips to add to her bowl. I was just generous with the good ingredients. As we slid the first batch of cookies into the oven, Gregory sat down at the kitchen table across from Bella. "Dad, I have something I want to talk to both of you about." His serious tone made me turn around. "What is it, son?" "I've been thinking about selling the house," he said. "Too many bad memories there, and honestly, I don't think I can ever feel comfortable in that basement again. Bella and I have been looking at apartments, but..." He hesitated. "We were wondering if you'd consider finding a bigger place, something where we could all live together." I felt my throat tighten with emotion. "Are you sure? You're 34 years old, Gregory. You don't need your father hovering over you." "It's not about need," he said quietly. "It's about want. I want Bella to grow up knowing her grandfather. I want to have dinner together every night instead of just once a week. And honestly, after everything we've been through, I think we could all use a little more family togetherness." Bella clapped her hands together. "Could we get a house with a big kitchen and maybe a yard where I can have a swing set? And definitely no basement," Gregory added with a shaky laugh. I looked at my son and granddaughter, these two people who meant everything to me, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Pure, uncomplicated joy. "I think that sounds like a wonderful idea," I said, "but I have one condition." "What's that?" Gregory asked. "I get to teach Bella how to drive when she turns 16? "Grandpa," Bella giggled, "that's like 7 years away." "I know," I said, pulling her into a hug. "I just want to make sure I'm still around to see it happen." 6 months later, we moved into a ranch-style house in a quiet neighborhood across town. It had 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen with an island where we could bake cookies together, and a backyard big enough for the swing set Bella had requested. Most importantly, it had no basement. Gregory had gotten a promotion at work and was dating a lovely woman named Sarah, who worked as a teacher at Bella's school. She knew our whole story and understood why we moved slowly, why trust had to be earned carefully. Bella adored her, but she'd made it clear that she wasn't looking for a replacement mother. She was happy with her family the way it was. As for me, I'd learned things about myself during those dark months that I never expected to discover at 66. I'd learned that I was stronger than I thought, that family bonds could survive even the deepest betrayals, and that sometimes the worst experiences in life could lead to the most precious outcomes. Every morning, I woke up in my new house to the sound of Bella's laughter and Gregory's voice calling out breakfast orders. Every evening, we sat around our dinner table, sharing stories about our days, planning weekend adventures, and building new memories to replace the painful ones. The old Patrick Morrison had been a lonely widower who saw his family once a week and spent his evenings watching television alone. The new Patrick Morrison was a grandfather who helped with homework every night, a father who had his son's complete trust, and a man who understood that the most valuable thing in the world wasn't money or status or reputation. It was the sound of your granddaughter calling your name, the sight of your son smiling without reservation, and the knowledge that despite everything you'd been through, your family had chosen to stay together. Aria had tried to destroy us by tearing us apart. Instead, she'd brought us closer together than we'd ever been before. In the end, her greatest crime wasn't the money she'd stolen or the lies she'd told. Her greatest crime was that she'd never understood what she was trying to destroy, a family's love for each other, which turned out to be the one thing that no amount of manipulation could break.